Copeland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Principal Deputy Speaker. Could I first of all apologise to you, the Minister, and indeed Mr Mickey Brady for missing their opening remarks. I was unavoidably absent from the Chamber this morning due to constituency business which had been previously notified to the Speaker. I will, sir, with your permission, talk on the general principles of the bill shortly. However, I would like to make a few comments in regard to the timings of this debate. As I rise to speak today, I look back with a sense of frustration at recent events, not only since last Thursday evening, but the progress, or not, as the case may be, that this legislation has taken since the beginning of the year. It is, in my view, an indictment of the two main partners within the Executive, having dangerously delayed this bill for so long, that now there is not only a genuine danger of it not receiving royal assent in time, but also whether it will pass the stages it needs to in this House. This piece of legislation, the biggest reform of our social security system in generations, has, as has been said, the potential to encourage thousands of our people to move from welfare dependency into employment, to make the failing system fairer, and to save billions of taxpayers' pounds. But it also has the potential, if implemented wrongly, to destroy lives, to take away support from people who cannot afford to lose anything else, and to leave behind many of the most vulnerable in society who this Assembly has a moral obligation to protect. Whilst I will talk on the reasoned amendment and the bill together, I would like to make a number of preliminary remarks at this stage. I look across the chamber at the Sinn Féin benches, and I see, obviously, an Assembly group not at ease with this bill. I have no doubt that they have major concerns, and I look at their amendments and honestly can agree with many, if not all, of their points. But I also see a party in danger of neglecting their legislative and governance responsibilities. Their proposal to delay would, to me, be understandable if this was the month of April or May, but it's not. It's October. Thanks to their track record on this issue, both in the Executive and behind closed doors, they must at least share some of the blame, as well as their partner, at the farce of only managing to bring this bill to this House at such a late stage. So I would ask them one simple question. Why have you, as lead partners in the Executive, left it so late? This bill is so important to so many people. We quite simply cannot afford to get it wrong. Every Executive meeting that they and their colleagues refused to get this onto the agenda meant in reality less and less time for this House to put right the obvious failings which will flow from this flawed legislation. And it's the same for the regulations. Indeed, they make that very point at the beginning about flexibility and consideration of Northern Ireland is crucial to the foundation of the entire bill. This bill, these words, which we are meant to be having a so-called high-level discussion on today, were not drafted here in Northern Ireland. They do not reflect Northern Ireland. And they show absolutely no compassion for Northern Ireland. Where, Minister, are the differences between this bill today and the Welfare Reform Act, which received royal assent in March? Show us the flexibility which you yourself have said Northern Ireland should exploit. If this flexibility lies within the regulations, tell us exactly which ones they are and what you intend to do about it. Your officials have had 7 months. I would ask you, Minister, to explain how they used them. Of course, you could forgive us for knowing why Sinn Féin may have tabled this so-called reasoned amendment. The dogs in the street have a view. They can see it. They believe it's a game of political brinksmanship, which it may or may not be. They think that by waiting to this stage they can send out hard-hitting statements and their base will suddenly realise how anti-welfare reform that they have been the whole time. But I doubt if the electorate in Northern Ireland like being taken for fools. We have, thank God, put behind us what was once called an acceptable level of violence. Now we are in danger of developing an acceptable level of political brinksmanship. Both are wrong. Both create casualties, and both do not represent good governance. On that point, no matter what Sinn Féin stand up and say, there are some questions that will require further answers. And Mr Maskey, cleverly, has predicted one of these questions and gone some way towards addressing it. My first is quite simple. Why now? I apologise for repeating myself on this point, but it needs to be said. This bill has been trapped in the corridors of Stormont Castle for months. Surely they should have used this time to put right what they consider to be the main failings. Would the delay now be a sign that they can complain about the passage of the bill as much as they like, but maybe resigned to seeing what may be its inevitable passage? Or maybe the Sinn Féin leadership have suddenly realised that while they quite happily sit in the Northern Ireland Executive, which I welcome, overseeing what could be perceived as slashed services in deprived departments such as health from adequate funding, they sit in Dáil Éireann in the city of Dublin and effectively accuse that government of treachery for doing something which is very similar to what has had to be done here. My second question is, for how long do they want to delay this bill? An hour? A week? A month? A fortnight? It can't be a month, as we know, because there simply isn't time. And my final question to Sinn Féin, and the one that they may find most difficult to answer, is if they are so diametrically opposed to the bill in its current form, why was it not blocked in the Executive before it got here? On that latter point, even though it would appear, sir, I will follow your example. on that latter point, even though it would appear that DSD got up to even less work over the summer than everyone was expecting, Sinn Féin and the SDLP must realise that they can effectively kill off this bill and all of the little original work which has gone into it. Nevertheless, my criticisms of Sinn Féin's actions in this are all the more frustrating for me, given the fact that the points they raise in their reasoned amendment strike a chord. The reasoned amendment rightfully talks about the need of consideration of Northern Ireland's special circumstances. Neither I nor the Ulster Unionist Party wants to be accused of being particularly parochial on the reform of welfare across the United Kingdom. As I have said, we recognise the need for change. But we must remember that first and foremost we are elected here in Northern Ireland to protect the citizens of Northern Ireland and address their needs. Had this bill been introduced before the summer recess, with some even primitive detail on the regulations, as should have been the case, I would have had no difficulty at all supporting Sinn Féin in their efforts. But as they know, as well as everyone else, with the bill coming forward at this late stage, we cannot easily allow their proposal to succeed. That is all the more upsetting, given that I and my party firmly believe that this bill, as currently set in front of us today, is a bad deal. In fact, I would go so far as to call it a rotten deal. I would challenge the Minister, respectfully, to himself acknowledge that he has thus far been unable to make any even remotely substantive changes to the bill. Mr. Speaker, now that I have made a few preliminary remarks on the delay, and before the Minister assumes that I or my party is calling for an outright breach of parity, I would like to assure him that we are not. It's a word that I have heard used more often in the last 18 months than I heard it in the first half-century of my life. According to the Oxford Dictionary, parity means the state or condition of being equal, especially as regards status or pay. The Ulster Unionist Party understands parity. We often accept it, but we believe that Northern Ireland should not be entirely bound by it. Where room for flexibility exists, we should at the very least explore, if not outrightly exploit it. On that point, as has been said, parity is much more often more than just financial. It's as much about operational matters. This bill is more than just about how much benefit a person is entitled to. Instead, it's a fundamental overhaul of the system. Not only are the amounts of money changing, but so too is almost every other aspect. The scrappage, if that's the right word, of so many benefits, changes to entitlement, and even simple administrative issues such as the frequency of payment. Whilst I don't dispute for one moment that there are currently far too many benefits with far too much complexity, I do have to express a little bit of scepticism on the motivation behind this reform. This is also an issue upon which the reasoned amendment touched. The coalition government in Westminster has gone to great lengths to dismiss the notion that the whole welfare reform agenda is centred on cost-cutting. When I look at individuals such as the current Work and Pensions Secretary, Ian Duncan-Smith, I see a man possessed, I believe, of compassion and a genuine belief in what he is doing. Nevertheless, I can't help but listen to other Cabinet Secretaries and leading party figures and fear that the current pressures on spending are being used as cover to attack a system that some people may feel ideologically opposed to. We must remember the measures contained within the bill and the changes to the social security system were announced as part of the coalition government's June 2010 budget and October 2010 spending review. Comments from recent days have done little to reduce this fear, and indeed I've heard it said directly in the media that the purpose behind the latest raft of proposals is solely cost-cutting. Don't get me wrong, I recognise the financial system the United Kingdom government is in. As a nation, we are spending more than we are collecting through tax receipts. Our national debt as of last month stands at a staggering £1.04 trillion, 66.1% of national income, and £41,500 for each and every household in the country. Think about that for a moment. £41,500 for every single front door in the country. Of course, there are some people who may say it is a bit rich for an Ulsterman to complain about spending more than what's being raised through taxes. But I can quite happily refer them to the days when the city of Belfast contributed 20% of the GDP of the United Kingdom, and tell them that I look forward to the day when we get ourselves through these current economic crises, which we will, that we in this part of the kingdom can once again become net contributors. Social security is a huge expenditure for the Treasury. Overall, the UK will spend well over £90 billion on welfare, excluding the state pension. In this financial year, £5.4 billion will be expended in Northern Ireland. It is said that the Westminster government wants to cut that spending by £18 billion by 2015, but that plan factored in economic recovery, which has not as yet appeared. The bill before us contains 54,000 words. It's estimated that it will slash 3.179 million of the £317.9 million of the welfare reform bill here in Northern Ireland over the next 3 years. That equates to £5,800 per word. And let us not forget that this money is above and separate from the block grant. Let us not forget that this money supports the poor, the needy, the sick and the disabled. The proposed legislation is essentially a matter of mathematics. And as we all know, mathematics is a very unforgiving science.